Putting a new spin on the GOAT conversation here on the Hooper's Log for Season 8, Episode 13, here on December 14th, 2021. That is right, we are officially 11 days out from Christmas. That's right, the premier day in the NBA schedule where we have the two best teams playing off against one another, the Warriors and the Phoenix Suns. And also on top of that, all the other matchups that we have going on, which generally have been the predominant factor in what is the biggest day in the NBA's regular season, that is Christmas Day. Today is Groundhog's Day in regards to the two best teams in the league. Like I mentioned, the Warriors and Suns both playing off against separate teams. You have the Warriors playing against the Knicks, and then you have the Suns playing against the Portland Trailblazers on opposite ends of the country, obviously. The Warriors will be playing in New York, and you've got the Suns playing in Portland, closer to my hometown here, up here in the Pacific Northwest. So I wanted to give a little bit of a different spin today on today's show on season 8, episode 13 here on December 14th, 2020 on a Tuesday again, kind of the origination of really the OG corner of everything else going on in the world of basketball. You got the Inside the NBA crew who does their show on Tuesday now, and obviously you got the OG corner here at the Lead SM, NBA Lead, whatever you want to call it, that we've been around here for about, 6+ years now at the Lead SM. Us individually, yes, we've been here. This is our 6th season, but in regards to the overall network and everything, yes, this is the OG corner in all intents and purposes. Obviously, we all know what's gone on over the last week. I want to talk about the Bulls, honestly, in this show for the most part, because they are in that middle top tier pack between the Bucks, Bulls, and the Nets. Kevin Durant went off for 50-plus points the other night. People try to say, oh, you got 50-plus points because no one double-teamed him. Well, hold on. That's kind of how it works, right? Like, you're given what you take. People will do this retroactive mind trick where they like to say, oh, well, Kobe Bryant never had to, Kobe Bryant got doubles. Kobe Bryant got this. Kobe Bryant got that. Hold on. Kobe Bryant, in major portions of his career, whether he had Shaq, whether he had Pau Gasol, whether he had the role players around him, the bench that he had surrounding him, the organization that he had, he didn't get double teamed as much as people think that he did, which is why Kobe Bryant had 30+ thousand points in his career. And people talk about Kevin Durant like, oh wow, it's pretty great that he gets single coverage. It's really pretty amazing. You must have must be really easy. If he would have been double teamed, triple teamed all night, it'd be nice if he got past the 40-point mark. That all of a sudden he get double teamed, triple teamed, and have a chance at doing things. No, that's the way the league has worked. You get hedged, you get cornered, you get all these things to try and get your points and your availability and your value taken away from you. But all in all and all together, that's not how it works in the league. If you're a badass, you're gonna stay a badass. That's how it's gonna be. Kevin Durant's been a badass since he got to Texas, since he got to the University of Texas, left his little bubble out there in Baltimore or out there in Maryland, wherever he grew up, and then he went out to Texas. He's been a badass. Like, people have known he's been a flat out dominant scorer his whole career. And for people to come out there and say, oh, it's nice when you don't have to get double, triple team. That's hogwash. That's garbage. Guys like Kobe Bryant, watching him vastly a majority of his career, as I did, he did not get as double teamed as people think he should have. And that's why he was such a badass. And that's a lot of guys. That's a lot of greats. That's a lot of goats. That's how it works. You're a goat, you dominate. That's sorry, that's just how it works around here. It doesn't matter the competition you play. It doesn't matter if it's the Pistons. It doesn't matter who you play. You're playing against professional athletes and what they are. And that brings me to my main topic. We know who the, we got the storylines kind of crystallizing now, right? We're under 2 weeks away from Christmas, and the storylines are crystallizing, right? The two MVP front runners right now in both leagues, Western, Eastern, is Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. We know that. We know the top teams in the East right now: Bulls, Bucks, and Nets. We know that they're the top three. We know the top two in the West: Suns and Warriors. And if I'm not mistaken, all of those teams are playing on Christmas Day. I think they're all playing on Christmas Day, which is fantastic because that's what the league needs. They need a premier star-studded event and a team-started event where you have everything set up for them. But what's gone on over the last week has been, again, a Groundhog Day episode here, talking about the greatest player of all time. And, as somebody who's not as entrenched in the world of basketball as I used to be because, kids, family, home ownership, job, regular lifetime things, life deal things, family things you got to go to all the time. You just can't be entrenched in your basketball as you used to. And I'm sure that's everybody. Everybody who's done media for God as long as I have, who have real lives and real things they have to go through all the time. They're not just kids coming out of college or whatever. You actually have to do real things in your life where you're absorbently busy and you have more different, you know, different sectors of interest and whatnot. You kind of focus on the key points and you run with it, right? And one of the things I was watching over this past weekend that is very, very relevant to my conversation about who I think is the greatest player of all time. It shifted a little bit. It shifted my narrative a little bit. And I feel like it's weird. Well, Chris, how can you shift your narrative of the GOAT if guys who've played in the past don't impact today, right? Or guys who do play today impact what you've thought of guys from the past? How does that shift? How does that you know, that overall mentality of how you can change the perspective of a Magic Johnson or a Michael Jordan or LeBron James or other guys of that nature, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell. How do all these names change when they don't play for X amount of years and they've been gone for so long? And a lot of the things I'm mentioning today are very obvious and things we've all talked about and things we've all brought up and come to an overall understanding on in regards to physiology and the way the human body changes over the years and how things change and how sports change in general, the entertainment, the focus on certain aspects of the game, whether it's athleticism, skill, the way that the rules, how things have overall been called, officiated. There's a bunch of different ways and ramifications as to why the GOAT conversation is so intriguing and so interesting. And the only reason it's been amplified the last 5 years is because of LeBron James and because he's been so phenomenal. Because he is. He's easily the best player of his generation. Nobody's going to debate that. If anybody debates that and says, "Oh, I think Steph Curry," I think you're dumb. Steph is potentially the next great player of the next generation. The next view of the next generation. There's nothing wrong with that. Kevin Durant is unfortunately kind of in that little corner pigeonhole where he's right in between those two guys, and he's clearly at some points in his career been the best player in basketball. Obviously, Giannis is in that same boat, and Giannis, you can make the debate, is also in that conversation of being the next great guy in the next generation of players. I mean, that's not a debate, but clearly one guy still is, and that's LeBron James. He's still playing. He's still playing phenomenal. He had 2 triple-doubles this past week. And in fact, I think the last 5 games he's played, he's averaged, 36 points per game, 8 and 8, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, pretty much triple-double the entire time. And I know the Lakers, they've finally been playing great the last week, but they've obviously been mediocre at best, with whether it's injuries, whether it's leadership, whether it's headspace. I know the fans. Listen, if you're a fan of the Lakers, you're a rational fan of the Lakers, you must be absolutely going out of your mind with how crazy people are in regards to their back and forth, viewership of the Lakers. Oh man, they're trash. They're this. They're, oh my God, they're horrible. And the next day they play phenomenal. Oh my God, they're the greatest thing ever. How come they? It's just so up and down, bipolar, that it's just like, what the heck are we doing here? It's freaking December. Calm down. It's like we forgot after the whole COVID situation, whether it was the bubble, whether it was the 70-game season last year, everything. It's like we forgot what happened 2 years ago in regards to how teams generally or usually play things out in the first couple months of the year. I mean, so much is still to be determined. I mean, we're officially 2 months into the season. I mean, really, we're 2 months in, and you've got people freaking out one under the other regarding what's going on in the world of what the Lakers are going through. And this is just what teams do, and they have newer components, a lot of newer components, which the Lakers have. And the one thing that has come by and stood the test of time, obviously, is LeBron James. And, seeing what he's done this weekend and hearing the news, and obviously, everybody loves to just get up on their LeBron James is unbelievable horse when he really is. He's unbelievable. But then they start to get onto the comparison of him being the GOAT. And this is where this weekend came to fruition of my opinion changing a little bit. I was watching a lot of old school, since there was no college football. The Vikings played on Thursday. Like, I didn't have a whole lot to do. I had a whole lot of family stuff. But in any kind of free time that I had outside of basketball, I was watching old school baseball stuff. For those of you that don't know, I grew up playing baseball, etc. This is kind of one of my original passions. And I was watching a lot of the old school All-Star games that were on MLB Network this past weekend. And one of the things that made me sit back and realize really the changes of times, obviously the anatomy of the human body, right? The changes. 30 years ago, they were showing the early 90s All-Star games, Ken Griffey Jr., all those guys in their prime, basically. Early prime, young prime, etc. And one of the things I noticed off the bat were a lot of names that I know historically are one-offs, right? Guys who are obviously great in what they do, because they're all-stars for a reason, but they only were all-stars because of previous incidents. So I did some research in regards to, World Series MVPs. Let's be honest. A lot of the World Series MVPs you've never heard of. Guys like Steve Pearce, who was the World Series MVP for the 2018 Boston Red Sox. Y'all never heard of him before. Outside of that one World Series, he was never an all-star. He was never in that conversation. David Eckstein won the MVP in 2006 for the World Series. I know I'm off on a different tangent here on a different sport, but I'll get to my point. Is that how people, media, the systems that were in place for how guys became relevant in the 90s is fascinating because it doesn't equate to the way it is relevant today. And it made me look at Michael Jordan differently. And I think as we move forward, further and further away from that era that was so much simpler in regards to how we viewed things. No one will ever change my thought process of Michael Jordan's mentality, right? If you wanted to go down the mentality GOAT metric, right? Who had the greatest mentality of any basketball player ever? I think it's Michael Jordan, and it's not even, I don't know if there's anybody even in his hemisphere or in his galaxy in regards to the mentality this dude played with, right? I mean, okay, maybe Allen Iverson, maybe Kobe Bryant. I think Kobe Bryant was probably in the galaxy, but you get my point. Like, in regards to the amount of effort and the amount of ordeals that they put forth to do everything that they could, and then ultimately come out with the accomplishment that they put forth with their effort, it's like Michael Jordan and then Kobe Bryant's like in the galaxy, but then there's no one else. I don't know of anybody else you could really pinpoint to that conversation, right? But when it comes to the overall picture, right, the overall scope, the overall thing, and I'm not talking outside of the world of basketball. I'm talking about inside the court, on the court, what's going on, what's happening. And it gets to a point where you start to break it down and you look at the commonsensical things, right? The basic human anatomy. 30, 40 years ago, humans were not as athletic today in all professional sports as they're way more advanced today in all walks of sports. Doesn't matter if it's high school, doesn't matter college, professional, it does not matter. Professional athletes are leaps and absolute bounds higher, better, altogether than they were back in the 90s. And in the 90s, they were leaps and bounds better than they were in the 70s. They were leaps and bounds better in the 70s than they were in the 50s. Like every 20 to 30 years, generation, there's a giant gap in greatness, right? And each player who was great in their given era easily could be better than they were prior. Now, obviously, then the debate comes: well, how would they have played with the rules and the physicality and the different types? Well, guys who were bigger and physical back in the 90s could dominate the guys back in the 70s because they were bigger and stronger. Guys today, physically, would absolutely obliterate dudes back in the 90s and 80s. Now you have your outliers. Obviously, you have your Shaqs, you have your Hakeem Olajuwons, you have those guys, right? Like nobody's going to debate those. Those guys are all-time genetic outliers that you look at and you say, yeah, they could play anytime, anywhere, any era, and they could have done what they did at the same exact time in that era, if not maybe a little more or a little bit different, but it would have been the same type of dominance because of just how dominantly, DNA, genetic, who they were, what they put on the floor, their work ethic, just how they presented themselves. Like there's no way you could be able to stop them just based on those parameters, right? And you look at the overall parameters and the scopes that we put on LeBron James, obviously since since before he got into the league when he was in high school. The whole parameter was he called himself the GOAT. He called himself the king. He called himself this, the next great one, the chosen one. All these things, right? Like SportsCenter called him the chosen one, or Sports Illustrated called him the chosen one. You got all these different parameters. The media spotlight is just absolutely blaring hot on LeBron James from the moment he gets into the high school stratosphere to even now till probably till the end of his life. But the only reason it's been that hot is because he's been that amazing, really, at everything he's ever done. And it made me change my perspective again. I said LeBron was the GOAT back in 2016 after they beat the Warriors the way they did, right? And I think if LeBron's career would have ended for some God-given reason, whether he got hurt or whatever, I think it would have been fair to say that based on his entire legacy and his goal to do a certain thing, which was bring a championship to Cleveland, you could have made that debate, especially with how and way he did it, right? But then obviously time moves forward, time doesn't stop, and a lot of things happened where the Golden State Warriors won 3 of 4 championships, or they won 2 straight championships, and then LeBron went to LA. He did his thing his first year, which was really weird, whether he got hurt, the wine thing, like the mentality. It was very odd. And then obviously they won the championship in the bubble, and then obviously this year now, or last year, I should say, they got bumped out in the first round, which happens. And then you go into this year right now where the Lakers are looking shaky, but they still got a chance to redeem themselves. And LeBron James obviously just had a week where he basically averaged triple-double, right? So one of the things that you look at with LeBron James in regards to the overall narrative and the overall scope is that, that genetic composition, right? You look at him and you say he could play in any era. I think even 20 years from now, he could play in that era. With how he's evolved, changed, his ability to adapt to different styles, eras of basketball, because he's played in about 3 different eras of basketball. Back in the early mid 2000s, it was a very mid-range. You really had to solidify your game in the mid-range and in the post to be any kind of requisite NBA scorer on a regular basis. That's what you had to do. And LeBron, he found a way to do it. He was younger, so he did not have the jump shot that he has today. Everybody knows that. He didn't have the jumper they did back then that he has today. So he was doable. That's why when you see his accolades from like 04, the 03-04 season all the way up until probably after his year with the Pistons in 08, the year Kobe won the MVP, till about 09 when you could start to say he was the best player in basketball. That's why he was in the second team All-NBA, not really recognized in certain things, why the media bashed him, because he didn't have the full package yet. He was developing that full package. We knew from a physical perspective he was one of the most physically gifted individuals we've ever seen in the sport of basketball, minus, like I said, maybe a Shaquille O'Neal and a couple other names that I'm losing track of. But he was in that conversation. And with how ridiculous he was, just from a physical athlete perspective, he was that incredible. But he did not have the full game package, etc. That's just why he got the flack then. Well, then he started going to championships with the Heat, right? He couldn't win his first couple. He chose to go to a different team, etc. The super team thingamajig. So now you have the taking the easy way out perspective for LeBron James, right? And you look at that angle and you look at that perspective, and you can easily see why people would rip him for that. And then obviously he won back-to-back championships against the Thunder and the Spurs, and then he lost in 14 with the Spurs, and then 15 through on. We know what happened. He went back to the Cavs, second stint. I just broke down everything else for you. But every single time he's been in a different era, there's been a different reason to rip him, right? You go into the early aspect of his career. It's because he didn't have a given set, level of expectations of the style of play that he would quote-unquote fit into. Well, I think LeBron, by the time he became the best player in basketball, that started to see the shift in the league. Not before, the third shift, which is the three-point era, which is what we're in now, but that middle stage of you had high-flying, physical freaks, guys everywhere around the league who could do it all. I mean, guys who could dunk, who could shoot from the mid-range. Everything was solidified within the game. In fact, it was so pure from that perspective that basically if you couldn't shoot a mid-range jumper at that point, you were what was your purpose, right? And LeBron had mastered the mid-range by the time he got to his peak physical aspirations was for Miami. He perfected that mid-range. He got better. I mean, people were still hesitant because of his previous, 8-9 years of what he could not quite do at the mid-range game, but his ability to perfect and craft that, he got to that point, right? Then he got to the Cleveland, and then everybody started ripping him because he couldn't shoot the three, because that's when Steph Curry started to become what we knew Steph Curry was already doing those first 4 years in Miami for LeBron. Or those 4 years in Miami for LeBron, Steph was already blazing a path for the three-point conversation. It just wasn't turning into championships, which it eventually did. Then once it started into turning into championships, people then started ripping LeBron because he couldn't shoot the three, because he wasn't beating Steph, because he wasn't beating the Golden State Warriors, which, let's be honest, they were their own super team. So you have all of these things that go against LeBron for whatever reason. Then you have the political angle. Then you have the social media aspect where literally everything he does, he can be criticized for whatever reason, for whatever angle, from whatever perspective, right? And I sit there and I watch the MLB All-Star Game from the early 90s, etc. And I see these guys playing. And for me, when I was growing up, those guys were like the best, the cream of the crop, obviously the All-Star game. And you watch them and you're like, wow. From a physical perspective, there's a lot of loose ends, which is not a problem, right? There's no problem in having loose ends. But you see today's guys when baseball, basketball, football, doesn't matter the sport, and they are all so finely tuned athletes to the absolute point where it is like, my wife and I also just bought a new car. So this is the other example. It is like you get in a brand new car and everything is so perfectly wound, right? Perfectly wound. And you see all the athletes across the board. And they can almost do damn near everything, right? And I go on to Basketball Reference to kind of get a gauge on more of like, okay, where am I really looking at in regards to LeBron James? Like, what is the angle I'm pulling from that makes me like him or not? I haven't liked him because of his mentality, right? Sure. Could his mentality be better in regards to his attitude and certain aspects of his game? Sure, but nobody's perfect, right? So why am I trying to pull from this perspective of he needs to be perfect? Because he's not going to be perfect, right? And I look at his stats and his career and where he is, and by golly, he is going to be the first player, whether it's the end of this year or going into next year, whoever knows where he plays, for whatever reason, I don't know if he's extended through LA, but it doesn't matter. I think he is extended through LA. I'm not mistaken. He signed a contract extension for another couple years. So he's going to be in LA for another 2 years, right? I think by the time he gets to the end of next year, 2023, and potentially early 2024, LeBron James is he'll probably already be there, but he will be the only player with 10,000 assists, 10,000 rebounds, right? This is some Barry Bonds stuff, right? And people rip Barry Bonds because obviously Barry Bonds because of the whole steroid thing and all that, but obviously LeBron, I don't think he's ever done that. I mean, he spends $1 million on his body every year to keep it healed, keep it healthy, keep it upright. And for the most part, he's starting to run into some injury problems. I mean, that's what happens when you get older. No one's sitting here and saying he's trash because he's getting hurt in his 19th year in the league. Good God, anybody who plays a professional sport for 19 years and your body's not trashed, I don't know what the hell your expectation is of anything on this planet. But in regards to now the fine tuning and the end pieces of a legacy and a career, now you start to look at the overall stats. Right? I still think LeBron needs to win one more championship in all reality. But even if he doesn't, the level of what he can do now, what he's done the last week, and he can still do it to this degree at this type, is stuff that is very, very, again, we're going across sports here. It's very, very Tom Brady-ian. I mean, I don't think Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. I've done my own thing on where I think Aaron Rodgers is the greatest quarterback of all time for different reasons, right? It's all based on different perspectives on what I have, and if you don't think, Tom Brady's the greatest player of all time, greatest quarterback of all time, that's totally fair. But in regards to legacy, he's painted the greatest legacy that a quarterback could ever shoot for, right? Whether you believe that's the greatest quarterback of all time, greatest football player, it doesn't matter. That's the perspective. That's what he's actually done. That's what he's actually created. So Tom Brady has painted the opportunity for the greatest legacy to be built and to be paved for years to come. 7 championships, right? 7 Super Bowl championships is what he's done in his entire career. 20-plus year career. LeBron James will be at 20-plus years coming up. And he's got over 35,000 points. He's going to he's going to break Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's record of points if he stays healthy, right? He has to stay healthy. He's going to get 10,000 assists. He's going to get 10,000 rebounds. No one's ever done that. No one's ever done 10,000 rebounds, 10,000 assists. If he gets to 40,000 points, he'll basically be the 40, 10, and 10, right? Like, that's what he'll be. Absolutely insane. Remarkable. And it kind of made me step back a little bit in rationalizing, well, what do you define as the GOAT, right? And you look at MJ and you look at his legacy, and it's absolutely incredible, right? It's just amazing. In the time period of what he did is amazing, right? And it made me kind of reassess things. I still think MJ's the GOAT, but now it turns into this, like, LeBron James is really, like, strangleholding from all other angles outside of the mentality and the championships, right? And if you think that LeBron will never be MJ, I think at that point it becomes histrionics in regards to, you being a little bit unavailable to open up your mind to thinking that this guy can ever be that. And for people to think that he's the GOAT now is definitely fair. People are going to be like, oh my God, Chris, you've swapped, you've changed, No, hold on. Like, sometimes time and relevance is something that you have to look at and see and conceptualize, right? Sometimes you have to step back from you and your point of focus for where you're going and look back on where we are with time, right? I know philosophy and psychology, all this stuff, right? These beautiful things to expand your brain, right? But you look at what the man has done for 19 years in his career, right? Where he's been, what he's gotten to, what he's become. And it's been so absurd, so remarkable, to the point where you start looking at the stat books and you start to say, well, I think anybody who just denies LeBron is just basically somebody who's just not willing to open up their mind. They just have a closed mind. They're completely against the idea of somebody overtaking basketball Jesus, which is LeBron, which is Michael Jordan, because an entire generation beforehand has the complete stranglehold on everything that they have in view of the perspective of what the greatest of all time should look like based upon a given entity, right? We're going into this new subset of players, this new generation of players, right? And I think we're going to hit a patch here in about 10 to 15 years where we have another conversation regarding another guy who's in the league right now, where we could talk about him being potentially the greatest of all time, based on a perspective, based on a shift or a change in the league, and that's potentially Steph Curry. Listen, if Steph Curry changes the way the sport of basketball looks in the next 10 years, you're going to have a generation of kids, a generation of fans, a generation of people, a generation of, executives, players, anybody who's going to view him and say, that's the baby-faced assassin, which is what his original nickname was, for those of you that don't remember. The baby-faced assassin came out, absolutely changed the dynamic of the sport, dominated a section behind, the three-point line. He dominated an entire section so badly to the point where he's probably going to double off Ray Allen, which he's going to pass here soon. He's probably going to double off Ray Allen in regards to the amount of three-pointers he's ever shot in his career. We all know Steph Curry can play this game for another 10 years. Not at the elite level that he's at right now. We know that. He can probably play this way for another 2-3 years if he stays healthy, 4 years if he stays healthy, because he's a smaller guy. He keeps himself in shape. He's remarkable. Doesn't even want to play that long. That's the other point, right? My point is that he's perfected that portion of the game so much so that he's done it for the last decade. Really. Curry's been in the league for 12 years? For the last decade, he's perfected the three-point shot. He's perfected it. He was already an amazing shooter at Davidson. When he got into the league, it took him a little bit to adjust, but once he figured it out, night. He was the best three-point shooter in the league. Quick. He was quick, the best three-point shooter in the league. And he was the greatest three-point shooter of all time, quick, after he broke his own record in 2013. He was ridiculous, right? But it goes into that same narrative of adapting and revolving and evolving into a new subset of ideas of what you can consider the GOAT, right? I've always said it's sacrilegious to say that Magic Johnson should never be not viewed as the greatest point guard of all time, because I think he should never be taken off that mantle. But obviously Steph Curry, with what he's doing and how he's doing it and how he's impacting people and how he's changing the sport of basketball, the entire sport, how he's making it viewed what it is today, you can make the case that he's better than Magic Johnson. I think he is. I think from a overall athletic, what he's doing, granted the rules are different, but he's still taking advantage of it from where he's at, mentality, he's the best point guard of all time. Is it tough to say that with knowing what Magic Johnson's importance is to the league? Sure. But I think if you had a subset and a stage of how the game was viewed back then to how it is now, Magic Johnson was absolutely impeccable and incredible. But a lot of comparisons have been made that Magic Johnson would be a relatively mediocre player in today's league. Not to say he wouldn't be a professional athlete or wouldn't be amazing, because he'd still be great. and he'd still be phenomenal to watch and fun to fantasize about in regards to a 6'9" point guard running down the lane. We all see LeBron James doing that now, but you get my point. It'd be incredible to see that still with Magic Johnson doing it at the pace that he did in the Flash and the Hollywood and all that stuff. But it would be different because the value of what he did back then wouldn't equate to the value of today. Because the ability to run the floor, which LeBron James does at an immaculate level, he's been able to do that his entire career, which is run the fast break offense. He's been absolutely amazing. And that's just not passing the ball. That's also finishing. People have been saying he's one of the greatest finishers in the transition game ever. And I've always agreed with that. I've always said, hey, in transition, it's very hard to debate LeBron James is the most forceful, scary player you've ever seen in transition throughout his entire career. From the start when he was a rookie to now. He's been absolutely incredible. The moment he passed that ball on his first possession against the Kings in the first game of his career, ever since, you could say on the fast break, legendary. Absolutely. But that is not the value of where the game's going right now. And the case can be made, and probably by 2030, we look at Steph Curry and we say, well, why isn't he considered the GOAT? Because of how he changed the game, because of what he did, because of how he did what he did from beyond the arc to make it appear so ridiculously easy when in reality it is not that easy. It is not. There's players starting to play like Steph. There's players starting to try and do what Steph can do from a dribbling, from a shooting, from an angle taking, from an off the ball perspective. There's lots of guys doing those type of things, right? Same thing can be said about LeBron James. LeBron James, physical specimen, absolutely phenomenal. But when it comes to how he's now just stacking up the numbers and the stats on such a regular basis where we've become numb to it, and the only thing we can really talk about is what he does off the court, that's when you decide and sit there and say, well, hold on, what are we really analyzing at that point? Aren't we supposed to be talking about basketball? Right? And so what he's doing on the court is absolutely phenomenal. I don't have to like the guy. Just because I don't like the guy doesn't mean what he's not doing on the court is absolutely outstanding, legendary. I mean, again, this isn't to rip LeBron. This is just the facts, because this is the same thing with MJ, right? LeBron, in all intents and purposes, could play in the 90s and do what MJ did, right? I think he could. I think he would be able to do it. Now, maybe not on the defensive side of the floor, not on a consistent basis, because he never proved that or he never needed to. But from a overall physical style of play perspective, LeBron James could bring that. And I think he could do similarly to what MJ did. Now, I don't think he would win the amount of championships that MJ won because of MJ's mentality. Again, that's what people come back to. They come back to MJ's mentality, the championships. Well, the championships comes with the mentality. It's kind of a both ends street, right? But you look at LeBron James, and you see where he is right now. This isn't to rip him. This isn't to be negative. This is just to be more matter of fact. You look at a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, and what he's done. He's in the prime of his career right now at 27 years old. He's basically 10 years younger than LeBron. Roughly 10 years younger than LeBron. And you look at him, and you start to see where he's at in his career, what he's doing, the kind of things he's putting up, and the similar trajectory of where you're at in your career. And you look at LeBron James, and you look at Giannis Antetokounmpo, and you start to say, well, Giannis Antetokounmpo, this guy can almost put up the same type of numbers as LeBron from a long-term perspective, but without the hoopla and the pomp and circumstance in regards to what the media and social media and all these other places are putting on LeBron in regards to pressure. Giannis has never had that kind of pressure, ever. No one ever will, outside of MJ, LeBron, and Kobe and guys like that. No one will ever have that kind of pressure. But looking at Giannis and seeing where he could be in 10 years, his numbers could be comparable based on where the game could go, right? Well, Chris, Giannis could never beat LeBron. You're a hater. Why are you saying that? No. I'm just trying to be honest with you. From the perspective that I'm grappling now and that I'm taking now, putting LeBron in the top 2 all time, I have him slightly behind MJ, but I honestly think he's going to pass MJ here relatively sooner rather than later, and just all intents and purposes based on my newfound perspective on that I've seen. A guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that he won't pass him all time in a decade. When Giannis is 37, because he just turned 27, when Giannis is 37, it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that Giannis Antetokounmpo won't have a better legacy and a better career than LeBron James. It's also not out of the realm of possibility to not think that Steph Curry won't have a better legacy and career than LeBron James. Well, Chris, the stats. Well, Chris, this. Well, Chris, that. LeBron. All the LeBron lovers are just going to sit there and be like, what are you talking about? Hold on. Let's be objective for a minute. What does that say more about me than about you? I'm willing to change my mind and say, right now, LeBron James might be the GOAT. Just because, not because of the triple-doubles he had over the last couple of weeks. Just in general, when you reassess a situation with a more rational perspective, instead of having this clouded look of, okay, here's the perspective based on, whatever agenda is being thrown out there, or whatever perspective or whatever mindset is put together. You look at it and you start to say, well, hold on. I look at LeBron James and I say, you know what? On the basketball court, with what he's been given and all the things he's been allowed to have and take take advantage of and do what he can do, it's really, really hard to say that he's not the GOAT. It's really, really hard not to. I think the one guy, just because the mentality is so outrageously ridiculous, is Michael Jordan. Because his mentality changed the perspective of everybody else. And, okay, I got to be that to be that great, right? I got to have that mindset to be that great. And that's not to say LeBron doesn't have that mindset. I just think that there are guys who are just not cut out to be like that, right? Because it takes a different type of dude and a different type of mentality to be there, right? And again, I think MJ's the GOAT, but it's this thought process of where, LeBron wouldn't have been able to do what Kareem did from, the late 60s to the early 80s. I think is crazy. I think LeBron could have been in that similar conversation. Same with Magic. Same with all these guys. I think to grade them on the overall picture isn't fair from an overall perspective, because when you look at the overall landscape and the overall picture of the ways the sport has changed, it's changed a lot for all those guys, right? Magic only played 13 years, right? And he only played 13 consecutive years until he had his HIV situation, and then he retired, and he came back, and then that became its own hairy thing. Michael Jordan, he retired twice, came back, obviously won championships, mentality was unbelievable, all these things, but he didn't have a full, rounded body of work. And I think that's what a lot of people talked about with LeBron James, is the full, well-roundedness of his body of work, his ability to do everything at all ends, maybe not on the defensive side of the floor because he didn't have that overall intensity compared to a guy like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, those guys. But in regards to what he can do offensively, his ability to rebound, his ability to run the floor with the best of them, his stats are absolutely crazy when you look at them online. And then you look at his ability to play in the playoffs. I mean, I was looking at a bunch of playoff stats from LeBron, and all of his performances in the playoffs, and it's like almost every single playoffs, he has at least one 40-point game. Even this past year, I think he had a 30-plus point performance against the Suns, and he's, 36 years old? It's absolutely ridiculous, if you ask me. It's just absolutely insane. And so you start to really kind of, it comes back to the whole Tom Brady perspective, right? We're seeing what Brady's doing. Brady's had a long career, very successful, incredible career based on what he's done and what he's been able to put out there, right? But I think it's unfair to then rip Brady and say that he's not very good because he's had all this, and this. Well, it's whether you like him or not. It's kind of the same thing with LeBron James. You can't just sit there and be like, well, I don't like him because of this, and this. Well, start looking at the stats. Start looking at the performances. Start looking at the longevity. Start looking at the dedication to the sport. Start looking at all these other ramifications. And you sit there and you start to say, well, hold the phone for a minute. Just because MJ won 6 championships, just because he was in, he has his own brand, just because, he made Nike stock fly where it did, just because he has this mentality, just because, he has this attitude towards things, right? That doesn't make him a better player, because statistically he doesn't quite have those accolades statistically that a LeBron James has. I'm not sitting here saying stats are everything, because they're not. But I think in regards to the standard that we hold MJ at, sometimes because based upon what our imagination tells us, because let's be honest, when you start talking about MJ, your imagination goes wild with, holy crap, how amazing was he? And it kind of differentiates from the reality, right? When you actually watch the reality of athletes from back in the day, it's going to be the same thing with LeBron. 20 years from now, we're going to look at players from the 2010s. We're going to watch the 2016 NBA Finals. We're going to watch it when my daughter graduates from high school. In 2038, I'm going to go rewatch the 2016 NBA Finals with her. And she's going to sit there and be like, Dad, were those athletes? Like, those were the athletes you were considering the best? Think about that. Just step back from the now, right? Step back from what you've known for the last 75 years in the sport of basketball. In 16 years from now, in the 2037, 2038 basketball season, Steph Curry will be long gone. LeBron James will be way long gone. And this entire generation of players will be gone. All of them. I mean, I think all of them will be gone by then. If not damn near close, Giannis will be 40 something. So a lot of dudes will be gone, right? When you look at the landscape of that conversation, 2038, right? 2037, 2038. And whomever that generation of kids, my daughter, the kids, around that age, a little bit younger, etc., the people they will grow up to watch the sport, they're all going to do the same thing that a lot of these kids right now are doing with LeBron James. They're saying LeBron's the greatest player I've ever seen. Oh my God, for this reason, for this statistical measure, for this excitement measure, for this reason, for that reason. They're going to do the same thing with LeBron James. And all of us old heads will be in our 40s and 50s are going to sit there and be like, yo, LeBron James was a bad man. You shouldn't be ripping LeBron James. You're crazy. You have to have that fluidity of the rationale and the perspective of knowing that come 20, 35, 36, 37, 38, when that time frame comes around, the athletes are going to be better. The athletes are going to be so much better to the point where we're not even going to be able to fathom the differentiation of what they are now to then, right? So the conversation of LeBron James being the GOAT might only be a thing for 25 years. It's the same thing with Michael Jordan. You really watch a 90s basketball game now and you sit there and say, damn, these dudes were, comparatively, these dudes were just not athletic. Comparatively, right? Clearly the best at what they did at the time. But now you're like, oh my God, no, there's no way. The same conversation with Michael Jordan, right? 25 years the GOAT. Well, we're probably going to do the same thing with LeBron James here. And come the time my daughter graduates from high school, 2038, I'm telling you, it's going to be one of those things where it's like, Dad, you think this is the greatest NBA Finals you've ever seen, the 2016 NBA Finals, when the Cavs came back? These dudes look like scrubs. I'll be like, are you serious, right? That's what my thing will tell me, right? That's what I will tell myself. You think these guys are scrubs? 20 years ago, this is the greatest NBA Finals I've ever seen. Whether it was LeBron, Steph, KD, doesn't matter. Draymond Green, doesn't matter. These dudes were flying up and down the court, playing absolutely phenomenal basketball. And you think these guys are scrubs? Because God only knows, the next generation of kids, they'll be dunking until they're 30. Dunking like LeBron did in his first couple years in the league where he was dunking, the level of athleticism LeBron had in his first couple years. There will be dudes doing that. Everybody will be doing that. You know what I mean? Everybody will be doing what LeBron could do back then. Everybody could play every position by then. The game will transition to a point where centers will be, kind of like what they're already doing. Centers will be 7'5", running down the court, dribbling the basketball between their legs and shooting the ball from 40 feet out because there'll be a 4-point line. I'm just trying to tell you the game will change and evolve and drastically, change into this thing that we don't recognize because that's what's happened over the last 25 years. And we're going to have this same differentiating conversation about who the GOAT is. So I don't have such a qualm with saying that LeBron James, is the GOAT right now because guess what? Come the next generation of kids, people, front office people, etc., they're all going to sit there and be like, yeah, no, LeBron wouldn't work in this era. Or Michael Jordan definitely would play like trash in this era. Or, Magic Johnson, probably couldn't even get past half court in this era. You know what I mean? The game evolves. The game changes. The game drastically just deduces into this different, metric that we don't even recognize as time moves forward. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with the mindset of thinking that the game's going to evolve and change and get better. No, nothing wrong with that. But reevaluating the Groundhog's Day, right? Talking about the GOAT all over again. Because that's what's going to happen when LeBron gets into this, this routine again of playing the way he's playing, which he's playing phenomenal right now. And we'll have this same conversation. I'm sorry for shrinking that mentality of knowing that the GOAT isn't ever going to always be the GOAT. But people are doing that now with LeBron, which is fair. You look at the stats and you're just like, damn, who's ever going to top that? Who's ever going to take that? Right? I'm sure it was the same exact thing with Bill Russell. Michael Jordan thinks he can top Bill Russell? 6 championships against 11? They did different metrics back in the 90s, people. They did way different metrics than they did back in the 90s. They were so simplified. The game was so much simpler in regards to how things were looked at. If you didn't have chips, it didn't matter. You know what I mean? If you didn't have chips, it didn't matter. If you didn't have points, it didn't matter. Right? So that's just kind of how it worked back then. we're obviously evolved. We're evolving as a species. And come another 15 years from now, I can almost guarantee you it's going to do the same thing. And I think that's going to be the case. And I honestly think now, after kind of reevaluating what I've seen from LeBron and what I keep seeing from LeBron, I think he's actually like really kind of on the doorstep of MJ instead of really being far away. He'll never take it, blah, blah, blah. That's a very old ritualistic mentality and perspective of how you can view things. I think from an overall basketball perspective, LeBron James is probably going to pass MJ here over the next year or two. And I can guarantee you if he wins another championship, he will pass LeBron. He will pass MJ. Now, okay, championships don't mean everything, obviously. I just said it, right? Bill Russell won 11 championships. MJ won 6. We considered MJ the GOAT. Okay, so championships clearly don't mean anything in regards to the long-term ramification time capsule perspective of everything, right? You start looking at LeBron's stats, they way overwhelm everybody else. Everybody all time. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. And so then you look at MJ and you start saying the same thing. Okay, right? He had all the promotion, the pomp and circumstance, the mentality, the attitude, but LeBron James' stats, sometimes they just get overwhelming, and they're getting to that point. So I'm reevaluating myself in regards to viewing who the GOAT is. Let's jump back to it. It's December 14th, 2021. I know I took you down the realm of in the future, in the past, all these places jumping around, Back to the Future type things, jumping back and forth into the DeLorean. We're back now. December 14th, 2021. Season 8, Episode 13 is in the books. Season 8, Episode 14 will be next week, right before Christmas. It's going to be a different episode. We're going to talk about kind of more of a general perspective on where the show's been, because it'll roughly be our 7th year anniversary for the show from when I started. And it'll be fun to talk about kind of where the game has gone and has changed and as things have evolved, because they have. I mean, I just did that a little bit today, but it'll be different from an overall perspective talking about it and kind of giving you a little bit of a rundown on what to expect for Christmas Day, which is clearly one of the biggest days in the NBA for its entire calendar year. So, again, I thank you for hanging in with me. Episode 13 is in the books. Episode 14 next week. Have a good one.